I always believed that honesty was the cornerstone of our marriage. For over 10 years, Emily and I built a life together filled with laughter, shared dreams, and quiet moments that made even the simplest day feel extraordinary. My name is John Matthews, and I once thought that nothing could shake the foundation of trust we had so carefully constructed. Yet life, unpredictable and harsh at times, had a different plan for me, one that would shatter my world in an instant. It was a cool autumn evening. The sky was a blend of deep blue and fading amber as I sat in the living room, lost in thought and the comfort of routine. I had just finished reading a book when I heard Emily's voice from the next room. There was an unusual steadiness in her tone, a firmness that contrasted sharply with the warmth I'd always known. Curious and a little unsettled, I paused my reading. I could sense that something was off, though I couldn't yet put my finger on it. Without warning, Emily's voice broke through the silence. "John, I'm tired of hiding," she said. Every syllable reverberated in the quiet space, each word cutting deeper than I could imagine. "So just know, I have a great, enduring lover, and no more secrets." In that moment, the world around me slowed to a crawl. My heart pounded in my ears as I tried to process the unthinkable. I had known that there had been subtle signs, late nights, hushed phone calls, the slight distance in her eyes, but nothing could have prepared me for this confession. For a long, agonizing minute, I remained frozen in the doorway, torn between disbelief and the rising tide of betrayal. The words echoed relentlessly, each repetition of, "I have a great, enduring lover," driving a stake of despair into my chest. I struggled to comprehend how the woman I loved so dearly could cast aside our shared history so casually. Questions swarmed my mind. How long had this hidden life existed? Who was this man who had stolen away the part of her that once belonged to me? And most painfully of all, why had I not seen it sooner? I remember the surreal sensation of watching her across the room, her eyes brimming with a mix of resignation and defiance. In that dim light, everything seemed to blur, memories of our happiest days intermingled with the bitter taste of betrayal. I tried to speak, to demand an explanation, but my voice was swallowed by the overwhelming shock and grief. Instead, I sank slowly into the nearest chair, feeling as if the ground beneath me had given way. Every cherished moment we'd shared now felt tainted by the cruel truth that lay bare before me. In the ensuing silence, I could hear my own breathing, each inhalation a reminder that I was still here, still painfully aware of the collapse of the life I thought I knew. I recalled our early courtship, the promises made under starlit skies, and the tender moments that had once filled our days with hope. Now, those memories were like shattered glass, glinting with both beauty and danger. The shock of her words left me numb, yet deep inside, a storm of emotions began to brew. Anger, sorrow, and disbelief battled one another as I wrestled with the reality of her betrayal. As the minutes turned into what felt like hours, I found myself replaying every small detail that now made sense. Every late-night text, every evasive answer when I inquired about her day, all of it added up to this catastrophic moment. I recalled the time she brushed off my concerns with a laugh, assuring me that everything was fine, and now I understood that was nothing more than a lie. My mind reeled with the realization that I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, one that Emily had maintained while nurturing a secret life behind my back. The shock of her declaration eventually gave way to a deep, aching sorrow. I began to understand that the bond we had cherished was irreparably broken. In that quiet, heart-wrenching moment, I resolved that I would not allow myself to be consumed entirely by despair. Even though every fiber of my being felt torn apart, I knew that clinging to the past would only slow my journey toward healing. I had to confront this new, painful reality, no matter how unbearable it seemed. I gathered my thoughts slowly, realizing that while Emily's confession was devastating, it was also a call to face the truth. The raw honesty of her words, though bitter, forced me to acknowledge the cracks in our relationship that I had long ignored. In the midst of my anguish, a spark of determination began to flicker. I knew that I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal, not to justify it, but to find a way forward from the wreckage of our shared life. The rest of that night was a blur of silent tears and bitter reflections. I wandered from room to room in our once happy home, each familiar corner now a painful reminder of what had been lost. The echoes of our laughter were replaced by the silence of abandonment. I could still see her smile in my mind, but it was forever marred by the haunting confession that had come to define our relationship. Every memory was now colored by the knowledge of her deceit, and the future we had planned together was nothing more than an illusion. As the first light of dawn crept through our windows, I sat by the kitchen table, still clutching the remnants of the conversation that had shattered my world. I felt the weight of every promise broken, every lie told in the name of preserving a false sense of normalcy. In that early morning solitude, I resolved to embark on a journey, not one of revenge or bitterness, but of reclaiming my identity and rebuilding my life from the fragments of what had been lost. I knew the road ahead would be long and full of painful discoveries, yet I also sensed that within the darkness lay the potential for a new beginning. The shock of Emily's confession had changed everything, but it also provided the clarity I needed to see that I deserved more than a life built on deception. With a heavy heart, I made a silent promise to myself. I would confront this betrayal head-on, seek the truth about how our love had decayed, and eventually forge a path toward renewal, even if that meant letting go of the past entirely. That day marked the end of the life I once knew and the beginning of a painful, yet necessary, transformation. I was no longer the man who had believed in endless promises and unwavering trust. I was now a man forced to confront the raw reality of betrayal, to acknowledge the wounds that would take time to heal, and to find strength in the face of overwhelming loss. As I prepared myself for the difficult conversations that lay ahead, I could only hope that through the pain, I might eventually rediscover a sense of purpose and reclaim my dignity. In that quiet dawn, with the ghost of Emily's words echoing in my heart, I took the first step into a future that was uncertain and daunting. Yet, even as sorrow weighed me down, I knew that I could not remain a prisoner of the past. My journey toward healing had begun with that fateful confession, a confession that, though it had shattered my world, had also set me free to seek the truth and rebuild a life defined not by betrayal, but by resilience and hope. The shock of that fateful morning left me teetering on the edge of disbelief and despair, but I knew that silence was not an option. Over the following days, I struggled to gather the courage to confront Emily about the revelations that had upended my life. Each moment was a battle between the desire to demand answers and the overwhelming fear of facing the full force of her betrayal. My mind replayed that moment over and over, the steady cadence of her voice, the cold finality in her eyes, and I steeled myself for the confrontation that I knew was inevitable. One rainy afternoon, when the world outside seemed as dark and tumultuous as my inner state, I approached her as she sat in the living room. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, and every word felt charged with emotion. "Emily," I began quietly, my voice trembling despite my efforts to appear calm. "We need to talk." Her eyes, once so full of warmth, now flickered with a guarded mix of regret and defiance. She nodded slowly, as if preparing herself for the inevitable collision of truths and emotions. I laid bare my heart, recounting every moment of doubt that had led me to this confrontation. I spoke of the late nights, the evasive responses, and the subtle signals that I had once dismissed as mere fatigue. With each word, I felt both the weight of my heartbreak and the burning need for clarity. "How long?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the strain of raw emotion. "How long have you been living this lie?" Emily's silence was more damning than any explanation could be. Finally, with tears glistening in her eyes, she confessed that the deception had stretched back further than I could have ever imagined. Her admission came in halting fragments, a series of confessions that revealed not only the existence of another man, but also a deep-seated dissatisfaction with the life we had built together. Emily explained that she had felt increasingly isolated in our marriage, that the spark which had once united us had faded into routine and complacency. In her words, there was a bitter honesty that contrasted sharply with the tender promises of our early days. "I needed to feel desired, to feel alive," she whispered, as if each word was a small surrender of her own guilt. "I found that in someone else, someone who makes me feel like I matter." Her voice wavered as she detailed secret meetings, stolen moments, and the gradual erosion of the trust that had once defined our home. The conversation grew heated as I demanded to know every detail. I wanted to understand how I had missed the signs, how every little lie had accumulated into a betrayal so profound that it left me questioning every memory we had shared. Each confession from Emily was like a fresh wound, cutting deeper into my sense of self. I listened in a haze of anger and sorrow as she described the allure of her enduring lover, the man who had stepped into the gaps of our failing relationship. His name, though mentioned softly, carried the weight of an entirely different life, one where Emily had felt validated, cherished, and free from the constraints of our crumbling marriage. As the storm of emotions raged between us, I found myself torn between the urge to lash out and the desperate need to salvage what little remained of our bond. I pressed her for answers about why she had chosen to betray me so openly. Was I not enough? I asked, the words bitter and raw. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to articulate the complexity of her feelings, a mix of regret, longing, and the painful recognition that our lives had diverged long before this moment of confrontation. Every revelation, every confession, built a bridge between the past and a future that now seemed irreparably broken. The room, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, became the stage for our unraveling. With each passing minute, the distance between us grew, not just in words, but in the silent acknowledgement that our journey together was coming to an end. The weight of her admissions pressed down on me, yet amidst the storm, I felt a stirring of determination. I realized that if I were to survive this betrayal, I needed to confront not only the facts of her infidelity, but also the deeper failures that had led us to this painful impasse. In that raw, emotionally charged moment, I vowed that I would not allow this betrayal to define me. I promised myself that I would seek the truth, no matter how painful, and that I would reclaim my dignity from the wreckage of our shattered love. The conversation left us both emotionally drained and exposed, yet it also planted the seeds of a painful clarity. I began to understand that some truths, as devastating as they are, can also be the catalyst for change, a painful stepping stone toward a future where I might one day learn to trust again. As the rain pattered softly against the window, the intensity of our confrontation slowly gave way to a weary resignation. We sat together in silence, the air thick with the shared knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. Emily's tearful admissions had stripped away any pretense of a happy ending. Our marriage, it seemed, was irretrievably lost. But even in that painful vulnerability, I recognized the opportunity to rebuild, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a man determined to forge a new path forward, regardless of the pain that lay ahead. That day, as darkness slowly yielded to the promise of a new dawn, I realized that the confrontation was only the beginning of a long and arduous journey. I knew that the process of healing and self-discovery would be slow, marked by moments of intense grief and unexpected strength. In that bittersweet moment, I resolved to carry the truth of Emily's confessions with me as a reminder that even the deepest wounds can one day lead to profound transformation. In the days that followed our explosive confrontation, the silence in our home was deafening. The once familiar rooms now echoed with memories of happier times, twisted by the bitter reality of betrayal. I found myself alone with a torrent of emotions, anger, grief, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. Every corner of our shared life became a reminder of what had been lost, and each morning, I woke with the heavy knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. I began the long, painful process of sifting through the remnants of our life together, trying to find clues that might explain how everything had fallen apart. Old photographs, mementos of special occasions, and even mundane items that once carried comfort now stung with the bitterness of deceit. I spent hours alone, questioning every memory and every moment of silence that had now become a void filled with regret. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. Each piece of evidence a reminder of the promises that had been broken and the future that was now irrevocably shattered. In the midst of this inner turmoil, I was forced to face the practical consequences of our unraveling marriage. Friends reached out with sympathetic words, yet their condolences felt hollow compared to the emptiness I felt inside. I avoided social gatherings and retreat into solitude, where every thought of Emily and the man she had chosen gnawed at my heart. The pain was relentless. The quiet moments once filled with contentment now became battlegrounds of memories and unanswered questions. I wondered if I had been too blind, too wrapped up in the comforts of routine to see the slow poison of deception infiltrating our lives. Days turned into weeks, and the shock gradually gave way to a numbing resignation. I knew I had to take action if I were ever to reclaim any semblance of my former self. With great reluctance, I began to document every detail of our shattered marriage. The words exchanged, the moments of silence, and the tangible evidence of her betrayal. I filled countless pages with my thoughts, a desperate attempt to understand where it had all gone wrong. That journal became both a record of my heartbreak and a testament to the pain that had forced me to confront the truth. Yet even as I recorded the bitter details of my past, a small voice inside urged me to look toward the future. I realized that, however devastating the aftermath, this period of darkness might hold the seeds of renewal. The agony of betrayal was profound, but it was also a catalyst for change, a painful, yet necessary, step toward rebuilding a life that was truly my own. I began to consider the possibility that, in time, I might learn to trust again, to let go of the bitterness, and to find meaning in the lessons that this heartbreak had taught me. The process of healing was not linear. There were days when the weight of my sorrow was almost unbearable, when the memories of Emily's confessions and the reality of her deception felt like an endless storm. I would find myself wandering aimlessly through our old haunts, the places that once brought joy now acting as cruel reminders of a love that had died. Every whispered conversation, every stray laugh in the streets, served as a painful echo of a life that had slipped away from me. I clung desperately to the hope that time might, eventually, soften the edges of my pain. In the midst of the aftermath, I also had to contend with practical matters, the financial entanglements of our shared life, the decisions about our home, and the overwhelming need to redefine who I was in the wake of such a profound betrayal. The legal and emotional ramifications of Emily's actions loomed large, and I realized that I was now tasked with not only mending my heart, but also untangling the web of our intertwined lives. Each step I took toward reclaiming my independence was both a struggle and a small victory against the despair that threatened to engulf me. Slowly, I began to see that the shattered aftermath of our marriage was not the end of my story, but rather a harsh prelude to a new chapter. I reached out to a few trusted friends who had stood by me during the better times, and though their support did little to erase the pain, it reminded me that I was not completely alone. Their words, though simple, began to kindle a spark of resilience within me, a faint light in the midst of the darkness. As I continued to navigate the labyrinth of loss, I realized that the bitter lessons of betrayal, as painful as they were, held within them the possibility of rebirth. I resolved that I would not let this devastation define me. With every day that passed, I grew a little stronger, a little more determined to reclaim my life. I began to understand that while some wounds might never fully heal, they could eventually transform into marks of survival, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable loss. That realization marked the beginning of a slow, arduous process of renewal. I understood that moving forward would require both forgiveness and an acceptance of the past, a reconciliation with the painful truth that had irrevocably changed my life. And so, in the quiet aftermath of our shattered marriage, I took the first tentative steps toward rebuilding not just a life without Emily, but a life defined by my own resilience and capacity for hope. In the weeks and months following the devastation of our unraveling marriage, I slowly began the journey toward renewal. Though the scars of Emily's betrayal remained a constant reminder of the pain I had endured, I started to see a glimmer of possibility in the midst of my sorrow. I realized that in order to reclaim my life, I had to first let go of the past and allow myself the space to heal. I immersed myself in long walks along quiet streets, where the gentle rhythm of my footsteps offered a small measure of comfort. In those moments of solitude, I began to reflect on the lessons of betrayal and the resilience that had been forged in the crucible of my suffering. I returned to old hobbies that had once brought me joy and even discovered new passions that allowed me to express the complexities of my emotions. Slowly but surely, I started to piece together a new identity, one that was not defined solely by the pain of the past, but by the strength I had discovered in surviving it. Conversations with trusted friends and even a compassionate therapist helped me begin the difficult process of forgiveness. I came to understand that forgiveness was not about excusing the betrayal, but about freeing myself from the relentless grip of anger and bitterness. Each day, as I continued to navigate the emotional landscape of my loss, I found small victories in the gradual return of hope and self-worth. I learned to smile at the memories of better times without feeling overwhelmed by the sting of what had been lost. The journey was neither quick nor linear. There were setbacks, moments when the pain of the past surged forth with a force that threatened to drag me back into despair. Yet with each setback came a renewed determination to move forward. I began to see that renewal was a process of constant reinvention, a willingness to shed the layers of old wounds and emerge stronger, even if the scars remained as silent witnesses to the battles I had fought. As time passed, I discovered that the betrayal, as excruciating as it had been, had also served as a catalyst for personal growth. I started to redefine what it meant to live authentically, to trust again, and to build a future on my own terms. The journey was fraught with challenges, but it also brought moments of unexpected joy, sunny mornings that felt like a promise of new beginnings, quiet evenings filled with the simple pleasure of solitude, and the gradual realization that I was capable of finding happiness even after the darkest of betrayals. Now, as I stand on the threshold of a new chapter, I reflect on the long, painful road that has led me here. The memory of Emily's parting words still lingers, a bittersweet reminder of a love that was lost. But I also see the promise of renewal in every sunrise and in every step I take toward a future that is entirely my own. I have learned that while betrayal may leave behind deep scars, it can also pave the way for a rebirth, a chance to rediscover one's strength, rebuild one's identity, and ultimately embrace life with a renewed sense of purpose. In this new chapter, I choose to honor my past not by dwelling on the pain, but by celebrating the resilience that has carried me through. I have learned that every ending, however painful, carries within it the seed of a new beginning. And so, with cautious optimism and a heart that has weathered the storm of betrayal, I step forward into a future where I am the master of my own destiny, where hope, renewal, and the promise of a better tomorrow guide my every step.